Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and in today's guide we're going to talk about how to spend your bullions and sparks here in Season 4. I'm going to do this for all 6 of the tanks, and we'll talk about each tank specifically. But before we get started with that, I just want to talk about some ground rules for using those bullions, using those sparks. So here are those rules, kind of TLDR, default, use this for any tank, you'll be fine. First bullion purchase should be a weapon or a shield. Second one, if you're a shield user, it can be the weapon or the shield. Otherwise, you're looking to start work on your ring set, your Aeronog ring and your Broodkeeper ring usually. And then once you've got all that sorted out, you can pick up some trinkets that you like from the raid. And then once you've got those, if you like to grief a little bit, you can pick up a Voice of the Silent Star, the cloak that steals some stats from your friends, and troll them a little bit with that item. Or just pick up stuff for off-specs. Of course, you've got to prioritize how your off-specs how important your off-specs are in this process as well, and maybe purchase something for them earlier as well. Using your sparks, on the other hand, pretty simple, right? You want to start your first 2 sparks on your embellishments. Now, for tanks, luckily, we don't really have embellishments that go on the ring slots, because I think a lot of other people are going to kind of fall into this trap of, you know, putting blue silicon lining on a ring, and then, oops, I want to have both the Aeronog and the Broodkeeper rings, and I can't wear 3 rings. So that's something that you will avoid as a tank usually, because TLDR, you could just wear 2 Shadowflame patches and be pretty happy on almost any tank. I would say for Brewmaster and Druid, you're probably going to want the Toxic boots instead, or the Slimy boots, respectively, or not respectively, but the other way around for those 2 specs, and Toxic patch. But it's hard to go wrong with the Shadowflame patch. So that's the TLDR for the tanks. Let's start now going tank by tank and talking about what exactly they're going to want to do. So first off, we have Warrior. Prot Warrior, I think the first thing you're going to want to buy is probably Golak for Big Dam. That's the one-handed axe from Virak. You could also buy a shield. Shields are really powerful defensively, so you may be interested in instead purchasing a Verdant Matrix Beacon, just upgrading this thing, having a big high power shield to get behind. That can be good too. I would probably buy those as my 1 and 2 items. You can also then eventually, you can pick up the special necklace eventually. But before you do that, you're going to want to pick up the Aeronog and Broodkeeper rings. Probably starting off with the Broodkeeper ring. The Broodkeeper ring actually upgrades 2 steps higher than the Aeronog ring, because it's a very rare item from one of the last 2 bosses, which is nice. But yeah, both of these rings are super good. You get all 4 stats off of them, but it's just so much damage and shielding for free. Effectively, it doesn't cost any stat budget on those slots. How do you do fire damage, you may ask? Well, Golak is fire damage. Your Helm Enchant's fire damage. So just there, you're covered on fire damage. You don't need to do any weird stuff like you did in Season 1, where you wanted a belt to proc those rings. Once you're done with that, you can purchase whatever trinkets you like. Some good options for Warrior are Manic Grief Torch, which is kind of good for everybody. That's just a nice option. You can pick up a Rage Heart defensively if you want, or you can pick up stuff like the Signet brand for damage. If you're, I would say, a bit of a maniac on Warrior, you could go with the Storm Eater's Boon. It's one of the specs that you're a little bit more likely to get murdered if you use this, but, could be fun. Whispering Incarnate Icon, if your group is interested in using this, then you likely should as well to help them out. They nerfed the power of this trinket in general, and they nerfed its group component in particular by quite a lot coming into the season, but it's still a very good option, and if you're doing coordinated content, that can be a good way to go. On the embellishment side for Prot Warrior, 2 Shadowflame patches, great, throw them on. If you don't want to buy a shield, you could just craft a shield, throw a patch on it, and buy a Golak, and then you've got very high item level stuff very early onto the patch. Or you can put it in other slots, less stat budgety slots like bracers, belts, those kind of things. That'll probably lead you to a higher power at the end, because crafted items are still a little bit lower eye level than what you can upgrade the awakened pieces to. You can also go for these bracers, the allied wrist guards. These are nice bracers, a little bit stronger defensively than going with something like the Shadowflame. Although at this point in the season, one problem with these sorts of stat-based embellishments is that we're getting into pretty heavy stat diminishing returns. So damage procs tend to have gained a little bit of relative value this season as compared to stuff like a stacking versatility buff on your bracers. For the same reason, Lariat, also a little bit less exciting this season, but also totally craftable, especially on Prot Warrior. Totally fine item, although it's worth noting that you may be interested in the Arboreal necklet in that slot. You know, if you're ever anywhere you're taking nature damage, you get free anti-nature damage shields from your fire damage. Pretty good if that's any value in the content you're doing. You know, if you're fighting Mythic Fireack, for instance, that is actually a little bit of value. So yeah, got to consider that when you're making that decision as well. Okay, that is Warrior covered. Let's go take a look at Death Knight. All right, so for Death Knight enjoyers, your first priority, if you have Fearlath, is to pick up a Scale of Awakening, bring the Fearlath up onto the Awaken track, and then upgrade it all the way up. Congratulations on the fun Flightstone grind that you're doing, or if you were smart enough to do so, pick up all the free Flightstones from the Plunderstorm vendor on that character. That'll help you on that journey as well. And then from there, I would again recommend moving on into the Aranog and Broodkeeper rings. Now you can skate by particularly without the Broodkeeper ring on DK. The stats aren't necessarily something you want, although honestly, it's not bad to just get all the stats this season because of the diminishing returns. They're all actually quite good for DK. The Haste and Verse are, I would say, still my favorite for like a Mythic progression rating type situation, but Mastery, totally playable. Much maligned stat for DK that's definitely totally fine. The Absorb is a little bit lower value on DK than it is on other tanks because you're mitigating much less damage that's incoming, so the Absorb is, you know, you're getting less effective health benefit out of an Absorb on DK than you do on other tanks, but it's still a great ring. Still goes up to 14 instead of 12 on the Awakened track, so still a great item you can buy. And then from there, you're again looking at trinkets, trinkets that are good on DK. Storm Eater's Boon, a little bit less of a Maniac trinket than it is on Warrior, but still somewhat maniacal purchase. Other than that, you've got things like the Grieve Torch, all the same trinkets basically that we've talked about before. Signet Brand, great for damage. You can pick up some stat sticks as well. And then we're just looking at options like Voice of the Silent Star if you want for griefing a little bit. You know, the Arboreal Necklet if you're interested in that kind of effect. General items, you know, you can. If you're not a legendary wielder, your first purchase could be an Ashkonder as well. I would say if you're maybe going to get the legendary soon, right? If you're like close on bad luck protection, I would probably try and wait it out, but it's obviously, you know, it sucks to not have a good weapon. So that's a tough spot that I wouldn't blame you for either decision on that one. For the embellishments for Blood DK, Double Shadow Flame is a great choice. You can also go with Bracers and the Lariat on this spec. I think it's a little bit worse to do it on this spec than it is on Warrior, but I still crafted a Lariat on this thing because I just like Lariat. I like you know, nice stat procky thing. I like the defensive value that brings, whereas Shadow Flame doesn't bring defensive value, and I'm a junkie for defensive value, he says, with a Storm Eater's Boon currently equipped. So I don't know. Maybe nothing I do makes sense. Do what I say, not what I do, and probably craft 2 Shadow Flames on your Blood DK, but, you know, you can't tell me what to do. I'm a free American. I can do what I want. All right, up next is Demon Hunter, and before we start Demon Hunter, I have a note for all tanks. So if you're... I guess you'll have missed this if you just skipped to your specific tank section, but all tanks except for Blood DK should seriously consider farming Dawn of the Infinite, particularly with hard mode on, up to Iridikron. There's not really anything important after Iridikron, and probably the other people in your group don't need anything after Iridikron either. The only thing later in that dungeon really that's good is a Mirror. But a lot of other specs have stuff that they like from Dawn of the Infinite that you can pick up from the first 4 bosses, Nick of Time, Double Time, which actually Demon Hunters can use, Iridol, you know, these sorts of things. But Prophetic Stone Scales is a very powerful tank trinket for basically every tank except for Blood DK defensively. Blood DK, I would skip it. I don't think it's particularly useful. It doesn't work particularly well with Purgatory, and Cheat Death Trinkets in general, a little bit less powerful, I would say, on Blood DK, because you kind of just rather have, if you want a defensive trinket, I would just take like a stat stick, and, you know, you're going to be close to death at all times pretty much anyways when you're playing that spec, so I don't particularly value the Stone Scales on that spec, but every other tank spec, I think picking up a Prophetic Stone Scales, great idea. Can't buy it with Bullions, but that is something that you should consider. Now, the other thing from Dawn of the Infinite specifically for Demon Hunter is the double time weapon from the first boss, which if you pick that up on the hero track, pretty great weapon, throw it in your offhand, and you're happy for the whole patch pretty much. You are very happy with that. The other thing that you should buy, probably the first thing that you should buy on a Vengeance Demon Hunter, is the Thorncaller Claw. This weapon is just bananas, very, very powerful weapon. I'd pick this thing up, and after that, again, you're looking at the Aranog and Broodkeeper Ring. Now, the Broodkeeper Ring, being mastery heavy, is very cringe for Vengeance Demon Hunter. We hate mastery on this spec, but it's still a lot of shielding, and mastery does contribute to your damage reasonably well, giving you attack power, and at this point in the patch, mastery isn't hitting diminishing returns, and your other stats are. So it's not the end of the world to wear the Seal of Filial Duty, but I would definitely start with the Seal of Diurna's Chosen on Vengeance Demon Hunter, and then after that, again, you're looking at trinkets. Again, the Call of the Storm Eater's Boon may be maybe a Siren's song to you. Other options, again, still Grief Torch, just a great all-around damage option. Very, very good for tanks in particular. You know, flat damage, always nice for tanks. It's a higher percent of your damage than it is for damage dealers, right? They're going to get more value damage-wise out of stats, whereas you, out of, you know, a damage effect or a damage proc, are instead going to be getting more value. Or you could go with stat sticky type things like the Incarnate Icon, Chromatic Essence, I guess, as well, theoretically. Or you could go with damagey, single targety damage things like Pocket Anvil or Signet Brand in particular, would be what I would recommend for that for Vengeance. There's also the Fire Act trinkets, which are options as well. I'm not a huge fan of these compared to those other choices, but they're certainly good. And if you like either of these trinkets, it's a fine way to spend your bullions. And then once you've got trinkets you're happy with, you can consider picking up a Voice of the Silent Star on this spec as well. For embellishments for Demon Hunter, you can wear a slimy expulsion boots. You can wear an elemental lariat. I'm doing that on this character. Again, I'm a lariat enjoyer. I like lariat more than most people, but most people tend to prefer Shadowflame patches on this spec. And again, remember, you can pick up an Ouroboreal necklet, so if you're ever taking, in fact, you're going to be getting nature damage out of your Thorncaller Claw, so if you're taking fire or nature damage, wow, you're getting a shield off of the Ouroboreal necklet. Pretty cool. Pretty compelling, so you can't do that if you've got a lariat, but yeah, I would say Slimy Expulsion Toxic Patch is fine. I would probably just go double Shadowflame over doing that, but you can go either way. And of course, you can pick up a lariat too if you're interested. Up next is Prop Paladin. For Prop Paladin, we're going to follow a very familiar recommendation here. You can start off with a Golak and get yourself a nice weapon. Weapons scale damage very nicely, so that's a really good place to look at for starters. You can also start off with a shield. Shields are strong defensively. I would recommend, unless you have way more mastery than you know what to do with, I actually wouldn't go with the Verdant Matrix Beacon, and I would instead be looking at the Calamity's Herald, sorry, the Broodsworn Legionnaire's Pavis, which is a mastery haste shield, stats that Paladin tends to like. Again, this season, we're getting so much stats that we're going to be entering heavy diminishing returns if we stack a certain type of stat on all of our gear. So you may want to moderate your, mastery intake, as it were. You may want to actually go with that Matrix Beacon instead. But yeah, picking up a nice high-level shield and weapon combo is a very smart thing to do early with some combination of... Golak is definitely going to be the best weapon that you can find, and another benefit is that this is doing fire damage for you. Again, you have your Helm Enchant also doing fire damage, but fire damage is a nice thing because after you get your weapon and your shield, you're going to want to get the rings from Vault of the Incarnates, just like every other tank. And pretty much every other spec. The rings are OP. Particularly for Paladin, we love the Seal of Filial Duty because we like Mastery and Haste, great stats, and the shield's nice. It's good. The better one for damage is, of course, the Aranog ring. You may want to start with that if you want to do more damage rather than want to live more, but particularly for Paladin, the Seal of Filial Duty is fantastic for living more because it's got good stats and the defensive effect. Once you've done getting some good rings, getting your weapons, then you can start looking at trinkets as well. Same ones as every other tank. Again, this is why I had that section at the start, which is like, here's a TLDR. All the tanks are kind of looking for the same stuff. It's weapons, then rings, and then trinkets, and you can't go wrong with that order. But the question is, which trinkets are you interested in? Again, I like the Dawn of the Infant trinket for all tanks, the Cheat Death trinket, but Paladin is one of the ones that I particularly like that on. Even though you have the Gift of the Golden Valkyr, I still just think a Cheat Death trinket on this spec is very good because you have a tendency of randomly falling over. At least I do. Maybe that's just a me issue on Prop Paladin, but that tendency is helped out by having a Cheat Death trinket. Your other trinket or other trinket combos you can look at, we've still got options like Grief Torch and Spiteful Storm, and potentially even Anshul, or Beacon of the Beyond, the one that summons Anshul, the Cosmic Wanderer, although I think this is pretty outclassed by Grief Torch, so I would only wear it if I was also wearing Grief Torch and I just wanted 2 effects like this. And then after that, you're looking at, options like the Signet brand, and you can pick up Fire Act trinkets again as well. Whatever trinkets you like, whatever trinkets your preference is, really. There's a lot of good options from the raids for those. And again, you could pick up Boreal Necklet at some point if you want a little bit of a shield against the against nature damage, which is not the most common damage type, and Verse Crit is not necessarily stats you want, although again, hitting stat DRs on Haste and Mastery, so might be something that you're actually somewhat interested in. After you have figured out what you want to spend your bullions on, embellishments for Prop Paladin. Again, double Shadow Flame, can't go wrong. Good combo, good damage. Doesn't provide defensive value, but damage is always nice. If you're looking for defensive value, there are those bracers that give some verse for nearby allies, the Allied Replicars of Companionship. There's Elemental Lariat, which I'm a fan of, for sure. Or there's also Pants that increase your haste when you hit new targets. A lot of Prop Pallies were running that last season. It does, again, suffer from the fact that getting haste rating is going to give you diminishing returns more this season than last season, and you're wearing 3 item levels lower in your pants than a Mythtrack pants would have, so if you can get access to Mythtrack pants, that's a high stat budget slot, so you may not be interested in crafting that, but it's still a good option. It's still a totally fine option, especially for Prop Pallies, so that is something that you can consider. All right, Druid time. Now, for Druids, one benefit that you have if you're playing a Guardian Druid, if you are raiding, Awakened Aberrus or Awakened Amirdrasil, you may be one of the only people in your raid that's actually eligible or interested in rolling on weapons that work for you. In particular, we have the Jaroon, Pillar of the Elder Flame, and Rashon. Rashon is better. These are great first purchases for your Druid. But if you want to be greedy, you could try and actually loot them from the raid instead, because you might be the only Agi Polearm user in your raid. You might be the only two-handed... you might be the only Agi Polearm user in your raid. You might be able to pick one of these things up, save yourself 2 bullions, and have a good high level weapon early on, particularly if, the Rashok weapon may be a little bit more accessible on, say, Heroic or Mythic difficulty, high item level version of this weapon, as compared to Rashon, which does come from Fire Act, so, obviously a Mythic version of this is pretty hard to come by and is still a great first purchase. I would recommend, if that's something that isn't in the cards for you in the near future, just spend the bullions on this thing. It's a very, very good weapon. It does a absolute boatload of damage. It's also doing fire damage for you, and fire damage is going to trigger your rings. And if you don't have this, the only way that you're going to be triggering fire damage is if your trinket does fire damage, or if your Helm Enchant procs, because the set bonus that won the poll was the Season 2 set bonus, which doesn't do fire damage like the Season 3 set bonus does, so that would have been an easier way to trigger the rings, which, of course, after you get your weapon, or potentially before, if you're going to try and be a sneaky little loot goblin and loot the weapon the old-fashioned way, is buying the rings from the raid. Again, if you want to do more damage, buy the Seal of Diurnus Chosen first. If you want to be tankier, buy the Seal of Filial Duty first. Neither stat profile, like Haste and Verse, tend to be the best defensive stats overall for the Bears, but so you're either way, you're not getting... I guess you're getting more Verse off the Seal of Diurnus Chosen, so the tankiness benefit, though, of the shields is quite large, so you're probably still getting a little bit more tankiness value out of the Seal of Filial Duty. I'd probably still start with the Aranog Ring, but that doesn't really matter, dealer's choice. And then after that, we're on to buying trinkets, buying whatever trinkets we like. For Guardian Druid, I especially love the Dawn of the Infinite Cheat Death Trinket, if you can get your hands on one of those things. And then after that, you're looking at the same options as usual. Storm Eater's Boon, something that, I'm I'm probably going to buy one of these things early and grief my key groups because that's fun. But you may want to preserve your friendships, so you may want to buy some of the other options that we've talked about ad nauseum at this point in the video. And then, of course, you could eventually pick up stuff like the Ouroboreal Necklet and the Voice of the Silent Star, and bang, mission accomplished. Great items, and you're very happy. The crafted situation for Druid, you can go double Shadow Flame, you can buy a Lariat. I think that this is a spec usually you're going to want to buy Toxic Thorn boots. And the patch, that tends to be very good for Guardian. You do lose a little bit of stamina. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. But if that's something that scares you, if you don't want to, play the highest damage option because it loses you a little bit of stamina, a little bit of defensiveness, totally respect it. Options like a Lariat instead are fine. A Lariat plus a Shadow Flame armor patch is fine. I've tried to look for another good defensive option to go on Guardian Druid aside from Lariat, and I can't find one, really. Like, you could play... there's like an allied heartwarming fur coat, but it's just so undertuned that I think you're better off just putting on a Shadow Flame armor patch. But the Lariat can be a good kind of all-around option if you want one. Generally, though, yeah, Toxic Thorn plus patch is kind of going to be the thing that I expect will be the most common, particularly if you're raid tanking and you're not in too much danger of getting killed and you just want to add as much damage as you can. I think those are some really solid options. Brewmaster, another tank that I quite like the Cheat Death Trinket on from Dawn of the Infinite, so picking up one of those things can be a pretty solid idea. Your first purchase with Bullions, I actually think you probably want Jaroon on this spec. Jaroon is particularly good on Brewmaster because your Spinny Jade Wind and stuff, your Spinning Crane Kick, all those, they'll proc like a couple extra of those Jaroon hits, and your scaling stats that increase the damage of Jaroon particularly. So stuff like Crit and Verse work very nicely on this staff's damage. You can, of course, go with a Rashon instead if you want, but Rashon's haste heavy, and haste is a stinky stat that we do not like on this class. So I would potentially start with the Jaroon here. Once again, just like Bear, you can try and rodent your way into this item by being the only person in the raid who wants it, and then taking it from the raid and, printing 2 Bullions that way. So if that's something that you can do, consider doing that instead. You can also go with the Thorncaller Claw, and then you could pick up, any kind of offhand you want from, I guess probably the Neltheris one would be the option you would go with if you wanted to do that. But, you're going to end up, I feel like that doesn't make much sense to just pick up a Jaroon if you're... I think you're going to have a better time than doing that. And Jaroon is much less contested in the raid as well than Thorncaller Claw if you're trying to loot them instead of buying them. The other stuff for Brewmaster that's good, the rings from Vault of the Incarnates are fantastic. Now, the Seal of Diurna's Chosen, beautiful stats, love the damage on it. The absorbs from the Seal of Filial Duty are just incredible as well, and it's not particularly haste heavy, right? It's mastery haste rather than haste mastery. So 2 great options. I would wear both of them. Again, decide if you want to start with tankiness or with damage or tankiness between the two. And if you're indifferent between those 2 values, I'd probably still start with the Aeronog Ring. Although if you have enough materials to upgrade and you're just looking for something to dump a bunch of crests and flight stones into, remember that the Seal of Filial Duty can go to a higher eye level. So that can be something that you can also use as a tiebreaker. For our trinkets, in particular on Brewmaster, I actually really like the Fire Act trinket, the Tainted Rage Heart. This is the only tank that I think I kind of like actively would seek out the Rage Heart on. For most other tanks, I'm not a huge fan of this one, but, again, your mileage might vary. I think any tank can. The only tanks I would think that you were crazy if you liked Rage Heart on would be like a Blood Decay. I don't think it makes much sense at all on a Blood Decay, but any other tank, if you like Rage Heart, that's fine. Me in particular, I find it to be very good on Brewmaster, especially. Brewmaster really likes this kind of button that you can press to give yourself a large absorb, and because of the way Brewmaster works, unlike Blood Decay, a 1,000,000 damage absorb shield for Brewmaster is going to go a lot longer. You're going to need it less often, and when you do press it, it's going to be way more impactful than on a Blood Decay, where that thing is just going to be taken out by the next auto attack, for surezies, and it's on cooldown for another 90 seconds. So I think Rage Heart is a strong contender if you're looking for a balanced, defensive option. Of course, Manic Grief Torch impossible to go wrong with. Storm Eater's Boon, very possible to go wrong with, very funny when you do, so consider taking that if you enjoy the rest of your group having a laugh at your expense when you inevitably become a stain on the floor as a Brewmaster using this thing, but, you know, that's a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage. And then, of course, we have standard options, you know, the icon, the signet brand, all this kind of stuff, all still perfectly usable on a Brewmaster, but I'm going to be looking to replicate this combo on my Brewmaster for sure, the Rage Heart and the Stone Scales, if I can get my hands on them. We'll see how long the passion for farming Dawn of the Infinite lasts on this character. For your crafts, for your sparks, I think the Slimy Expulsion Boots and a Toxic Patch are pretty much a no-brainer for Brewmaster. Haste is a stat that we don't like. We have Slimy Expulsion Boots that have the downside of taking away your haste. You can have all my haste. I don't care. I'm not using that stat. That doesn't do anything for me. So, yeah, I think that's a really, really good option. And I would recommend it for every Brewmaster, basically just Slimy Expulsion Boots and a patch. Even I don't wear a Lariat on this spec. I just wear my Toxic Boots, or my Slimy Boots, and my patch. And yeah, the Arboreal Necklet, again, you're naturally doing some... I guess you're not naturally doing nature damage, unless you're... No, okay, when you press Chi Wave, you're doing nature dam. And you're doing fire damage with Breath of Fire and with your weapon special effect and with your helm enchant. So yeah, you know, if you're ever taking nature or fire damage, you're gonna have some shielding value against those things. A little bit extra value. That is the last of the 6 tanks, and therefore the last of the video. I hope this helped. Please let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I've missed for any of these specs. Wowhead has guides for all the specs. Go look at that for your spec. See if they agree with what I'm saying or not. And check out other sources as well, other content creators of your spec. Don't blindly rush into copying exactly what I've said here. There's a decent chance that I've missed something for one of these specs. So, you know, be careful. But hopefully this has given you a bit of a framework to think about what you want to do. And maybe I've reminded you of an item that you didn't remember existed, or helped you kind of order your priorities. Because I do think it's going to be hard to go wrong with weapons into rings, into trinkets. You can swap rings and trinkets if there's a trinket you really want to get your hands on early on. But I think those rings are just so much free value that I'm going to be picking up probably both rings on both tanks as my second and third purchases, except for maybe my shield tanks, where maybe I'll pick up a weapon and a shield as 1 and 2, and then rings as 3 and 4 instead. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope it helped. Let me know in the comments again, and look in the comments as well to see if there's people for your spec that are suggesting something different or have a different perspective on what to do. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.